Today, regret weighed heavily on my heart, suffocating me with its bitter grip. My husband was an experienced herbalist, a healer of many, and I should have never meddled in his affairs. He could have treated himself, found a solution within his own expertise. Yet my desperation had driven me to a point where I took matters into my own hands, something I now deeply regretted. I should have known better. My body ached in ways I had never imagined possible. Every inch of me throbbed with pain, bruised and sore from the events of the previous night. What my husband did to me was beyond words, beyond comprehension. He hadn't stopped for even a moment. It was as if some untamed force had taken over him, and he ravaged me with an intensity I had never seen before. Where had this strength come from? I didn't know. All I had done was mix a small powder into his drink, something I thought would reignite the spark between us. But the aftermath was nothing short of a nightmare. My husband, with all his wisdom and healing knowledge, had always been a caring person towards others. He treated his patients with utmost attention and kindness, ensuring their well-being at all costs. But with me, his wife, things were different. I hadn't chosen this marriage. It had been forced upon me by my parents, against my wishes. And yet, over time, I had accepted my fate. I had learned to find happiness and contentment in the life that was handed to me. But then, things began to change. Slowly, my husband started drifting away. He gave me less and less time, and his passion dwindled. Our moments together grew shorter, unfulfilling. I tried to ignore it at first, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. But deep inside, dissatisfaction grew like a gnawing parasite, feeding on my every thought. I had tried so many times to talk to him about it. I gathered the courage, spoke to him in the quiet of the night, hoping he would understand my needs, but every conversation ended the same way, with him brushing it aside, telling me that I was imagining things. "I'm fine," he would say dismissively. It's all in your head." But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. I reminded him over and over that he was an herbalist. He had access to countless remedies that could help. If anyone could fix this, it was him. But his pride stood in the way. He refused to accept that anything could be wrong with him. His ego wouldn't allow him to acknowledge that he might need help. Frustration built inside me, an unbearable heat that threatened to consume me entirely. I felt like I was burning in an invisible fire, an agony I couldn't escape. My heart longed for a connection, for intimacy, for the love that once existed between us. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get through to him. His temper didn't help matters. He was quick to anger, and any attempt I made to push him was met with fury. If I insisted too much, he would lash out, sometimes with words, sometimes with his hands. He had imposed strict restrictions on my life, cutting me off from the outside world. My once lively visits to my mother's house and meetings with friends had come to an abrupt halt. At first, I thought it was his way of protecting me, of keeping our private matters within the walls of our home. But soon, I realized it was something far more sinister. He was afraid that I might share my dissatisfaction with someone, that I might seek help where he refused to offer any. Many nights I lay awake beside him, silently pleading for him to listen. I begged him to take care of himself, to think about our marriage, our happiness. "You're a healer," I would whisper. "You can fix this. Just try, and I promise I won't say a word to anyone." But his response was always the same. "Keep your mouth shut," he would say coldly. "I am a complete man, and I give you everything you need. Stop complaining." His stubbornness drove me deeper into despair. He couldn't see, or maybe he refused to see, the fire that burned inside me, the emptiness that grew with each passing day. I was desperate to feel desired, to feel alive. One day, an unbearable thought crossed my mind. What if I sought satisfaction elsewhere? What if I found someone who could give me what my husband denied me? The mere idea sent shivers down my spine. Was I really capable of such a betrayal? I wrestled with my thoughts, struggling against the temptation that whispered in my ear, but my husband's suffocating control over me made it impossible. He watched me like a hawk, never letting me leave the house alone, never allowing me to interact with others. He had trapped me within these four walls, leaving me with no escape. And so, in my desperation, I did the unthinkable. I obtained a small packet of herbal powder, something I had heard whispers about. They said it could reignite passion, restore vigor, and bring back the desires long lost. I mixed it into his drink that night, hoping, praying that it would work, but I never expected what followed. That night, he became a different man. There was no love, no tenderness, only an insatiable hunger that terrified me. He took me with such force, such intensity that I barely recognized him. There were no pauses, no moments of respite. He was relentless, driven by something unnatural. My body, now covered in bruises, bore witness to the chaos I had unleashed. And now, as I lay in bed, aching and broken, I realized my mistake. I should have never interfered. My husband was a healer, and I was nothing but a desperate woman who had let her longing cloud her judgment. I knew I had to find another way, but deep inside, a voice whispered, was there any way out of this prison he had built around me? Or was I doomed to spend my life in silent suffering? I had resigned myself to being trapped within the confines of my home, unable to seek an escape or fulfill my deepest desires. My husband's suffocating control left me with no options, no space to breathe. But then, one day, something unexpected happened. My childhood friend showed up at my doorstep. I was stunned to see her standing there, but I quickly masked my surprise and welcomed her warmly. It felt surreal, having someone from my past life, someone who knew me before this suffocating existence, suddenly appear in my world of loneliness. We had always shared everything with each other, and seeing her again brought a bittersweet rush of emotions. We hadn't been talking for long when the door creaked open and my husband entered. His eyes immediately narrowed as he spotted my friend, and without a hint of courtesy, he asked bluntly, "Who is she?" His rudeness made me flinch, but I quickly signaled him to stay quiet and led him into another room. "She's my childhood friend," I whispered. "She got our address from my mother and came to visit. She'll leave soon." He stared at me for a moment, his expression unreadable, and then nodded before walking away. But his silence terrified me more than his anger ever could. I knew it was a warning. Tonight would not be easy for me. I could already feel the storm brewing within him. But for now, I pushed my worries aside and returned to my friend, determined to enjoy our time together. We talked and laughed like old times. She teased me about my married life, nudging me playfully. "So, when are you giving us some good news?" she asked with a mischievous grin. Her words struck a raw nerve, making me pause. She didn't realize how deeply they cut. "Tell me, are you happy with your husband?" she pressed, her voice filled with curiosity. I hesitated. My life had become a prison of silent suffering, but I had always been too afraid to share my struggles. However, she was my only true friend, the only one I could trust. She had been married for 3 years now and had a child. Perhaps she could offer me some guidance. With a heavy heart, I finally decided to confide in her. Lowering my voice, I said, "Things aren't as perfect as they seem. In the beginning, everything was fine. My husband made me feel loved and fulfilled, but over time, he changed. He barely comes to me anymore, and even when he does, it's never enough. I try to talk to him to make him understand, but he won't listen. He insists that everything is fine, that it's all in my head, but it's not. I'm not satisfied, and I feel like I'm losing myself." She listened attentively, her expression shifting to one of concern. "But isn't your husband an herbalist? He can treat himself easily. Why hasn't he done anything about it?" I sighed, feeling the weight of my helplessness. "Yes, he is, but he refuses to admit that there's a problem. His pride won't allow him to accept it. He keeps saying he's a complete man and doesn't need any treatment. I've begged him to try, to at least consider it, but he won't listen." My friend leaned in, her eyes filled with empathy. "Shaista, you're not alone in this," she said softly. "I face the same problem with my husband. Early in our marriage, I realized he wasn't fulfilling me the way I needed. I was devastated. I felt trapped, just like you. But instead of suffering in silence, I went to an experienced herbalist. He gave me a special medicine, and after I secretly gave it to my husband, everything changed. He became the man I always wanted him to be. And after that, well, we had a child." Her words stirred something inside me, Hope, perhaps. But my husband despises medicines, I whispered. He won't take them, his ego is too big, and he thinks admitting he needs help would make him weak. She smiled knowingly. Men and their egos, she sighed. Listen, if you can't convince him, then maybe you don't need to. Just do what I did. Slip the medicine into his food or drink. He won't even know, and before you realize it, things will change. I shook my head. I don't know if I can do that. What if he finds out? What if it doesn't work? My friend placed a reassuring hand on mine. You have to take a chance, Shaista. Do you really want to live like this forever? Do you want to be trapped in this loveless, passionless marriage while your needs remain unfulfilled? Think about yourself for once. Her words echoed in my mind long after she left. I stood at the window, staring into the dark night, wondering if I had the courage to do what she suggested. My husband's face flashed before me. His stern expressions, his dismissive words, his complete disregard for my happiness. I had spent too many nights crying silently into my pillow, feeling like I was suffocating in my own home. The loneliness, the frustration, the yearning for something more. It had all been building up inside me for far too long. Could I really do this? My hands trembled as I thought about the small, innocent-looking bottle my friend had slipped into my hands before leaving. Just try it, she had whispered. Trust me. As I held the bottle, I felt a mix of fear and hope. What if this was my only chance to bring happiness back into my life? What if, for once, I could feel desired again? The sound of my husband's footsteps approaching snapped me out of my thoughts. I quickly hid the bottle away and forced a smile as he entered the room, eyeing me suspiciously. Who was that girl? He asked coldly. Just a friend, I replied, my voice trembling slightly. He narrowed his eyes as if sensing something was off. Don't invite anyone here again without my permission, he said sternly before turning away. I watched him leave, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew things couldn't go on like this. I had to make a choice, continue suffering in silence, or take a leap of faith. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized I was ready to take that chance. My friend looked at me with disbelief, shaking her head in disappointment. You fool, she said. If your husband refuses to take any medicine or admit there's a problem, then just mix it into his food. Dissolve it in milk or water. He won't even know. As she rummaged through her purse, my heart pounded with a strange mix of fear and excitement. Wait, she said, her voice filled with determination. Let me check, and I might have some of that medicine with me. My eyes lit up with hope. It had never occurred to me that I could take such a step. Could it really be this simple? My friend finally found what she was looking for, a small packet of powder. She placed it in my hand with a reassuring smile. Make sure he takes this twice a day, she instructed. In a few days, you'll see the difference. And if it works, I'll bring you more. Who knows? This might just fix everything, and you'll have the happy life you deserve. Just like mine. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The thought of finally having a solution filled me with renewed hope. I served her lunch and saw her off, my mind already racing with thoughts of how I would use the powder. As I stirred the pot of curry that evening, doubt began creeping into my mind. What if my husband, being an experienced herbalist, sensed something unusual in the food? What if he realized what I had done? The thought sent a chill down my spine. He was not a man to be trifled with. If he discovered my deceit, I feared he would not hesitate to harm me. My life was precious to me, but so was my desire to fix our marriage. For a fleeting moment, I considered throwing the packet away. But then I reasoned with myself, he wouldn't actually kill me. At most, he would yell, maybe even hit me again, or worst case scenario, throw me out of the house. But he wouldn't take my life. I took a deep breath and made my decision. If this worked, it could change everything. My life could finally turn around, and if it didn't, well, I would deal with that when the time came. With a trembling hand, I scooped a small spoonful of the powder and sprinkled it into the curry. As I stirred it in, another thought struck me. Why not just add the entire packet? Why go through this ordeal again and again? If I used it all at once, it might fix him completely in one go. Acting on impulse, without considering the consequences, I emptied the entire packet into the pot and stirred it well, ensuring there was no trace left. In my desperation, I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. That evening, when my husband returned home, I welcomed him warmly, hiding my nervousness behind a forced smile. I pretended everything was normal, masking my intentions beneath an air of routine. As expected, the first thing he asked was about my friend. His eyes narrowed suspiciously as he inquired, "Who was that girl, and why was she here? I've already made it clear to your mother that I don't want any of your relatives or friends interfering in our life." I had anticipated his reaction and prepared my response. "She's just my childhood friend," I said sweetly. "She insisted on coming over and my mother gave her the address, but don't worry, I didn't tell her anything about our personal matters." I did my best to convince him that my friend was harmless and that there was no reason to worry. After a moment's silence, he nodded, though I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. But I didn't let it bother me. I quickly set the table and served dinner, my hands trembling slightly as I placed the food before him. I sat across from him, my eyes fixated on the curry, watching his every move. He started eating slowly, taking small bites without saying a word. Each second felt like an eternity, and I could barely breathe as I waited for something to happen. Would he notice something unusual? Would he sense the effects immediately? My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, but he remained silent, focused on his meal. Finally, he finished eating and stood up. Without uttering a word, he walked to our bedroom and closed the door behind him. A wave of terror crashed over me. My heart pounded so loudly that I thought he might hear it from the other room. Was something happening to him? Would he come out and confront me? Minutes felt like hours as I sat there frozen, waiting for a reaction. I half expected him to burst out of the room in a rage, demanding to know what I had done. But the silence that followed was even more terrifying. Had I gone too far? I paced around the room, my anxiety growing with every passing second. My mind replayed every detail of the evening, wondering if I had made any mistakes, if there was any way he could have noticed the difference in the food. Suddenly, a terrifying thought struck me. What if I had given him too much? What if the excessive dose harmed him instead of helping? The thought made my blood run cold. I hesitated for a moment before quietly tiptoeing to the bedroom door. Pressing my ear against it, I listened for any signs of distress. The sound of his steady breathing reassured me, but it did little to calm my racing heart. I stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, lost in a whirlwind of regret and fear. I had wanted to fix my marriage, to bring back the love we once shared, but had I just made things worse? Finally, I gathered the courage to enter the room. My husband was lying on the bed, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling steadily. He seemed fine, at least for now. I sighed in relief, sinking into the chair beside the bed. Maybe it would all work out. Maybe tomorrow things would be different. Maybe, just maybe, he would finally be the man I longed for, but deep inside, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had crossed a line that could never be undone. I had no idea what was about to unfold, but a deep sense of dread settled in my chest. I quickly gathered the dishes, washing them with trembling hands, trying to distract myself from the growing fear gnawing at my insides. Just as I finished, my husband's voice thundered through the house, calling my name with an authority that sent shivers down my spine. "Shaista, come to the room!" My heart pounded against my ribcage and my legs felt like they would give way beneath me. A deep pit of fear had already formed in my stomach. Something terrible was about to happen. I could feel it. But amidst the fear, there was a strange flicker of hope. Was he finally going to claim me the way I had longed for? Would tonight finally be different? Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the room. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, I felt the sting of his palm across my face. A sharp, resounding slap that sent me crashing to the floor. The impact was so sudden and forceful that for a moment I couldn't comprehend what had happened. My cheek burned and tears welled up in my eyes. I had thought he would embrace me tonight, that he would make me feel desired. Instead, he had humiliated me. He towered over me, his eyes burning with rage as he grabbed a fistful of my hair and forced me to look at him. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" he spat, his grip tightening painfully. "You thought you could fool me? I'm not some ignorant fool, Shaista. I'm a Hakim. I can smell medicine from a mile away. I know exactly what you mixed into the food. Tears streamed down my face as I stammered. I I just wanted to help. I didn't mean. His grip tightened further and he yanked me closer, his breath hot against my face. I told you once, he hissed. I am a complete man. And yet you dared to defy me. Before I could react, he threw me onto the bed with such force that I gasped. My heart raced, and a sickening sense of fear mixed with anticipation coursed through me. Despite everything, I thought, finally, he will touch me. Finally, he will claim me as his wife. I quickly shed my clothes, eager to please him, but what followed was not what I had imagined. He was not tender, nor loving. He was filled with fury, and he poured all his anger onto my fragile body. My cries echoed through the room as he unleashed his rage, showing no mercy. I begged him to stop, pleaded with him to understand that I had only done it out of love, but he didn't listen. His grip was bruising, his actions ruthless. The pain was unbearable, and I could feel every inch of my body breaking under his assault. My muscles screamed in agony, and I could barely breathe through the sobs racking my chest. I had made a terrible mistake, and now I was paying the price. That night was endless, a torment I couldn't escape. I lay on the edge of the bed, curled into myself, tears streaming down my face, my body aching in ways I had never known before. My husband, however, had finally found satisfaction, not in love, but in dominance. He had proven his power, and I was left broken. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and bruises littering my skin. But before I could even gather my strength, he was upon me again. Did you think it was over? He sneered, dragging me towards him. I'll teach you never to challenge me again. I cried, I begged, but he showed no mercy. He took what he wanted, and I was left feeling hollow and used. Days turned into weeks, and this became my new reality. Morning, night, whenever he pleased. He had turned me into nothing more than an object for his satisfaction. My body weakened, my spirit shattered. I could no longer walk properly, and exhaustion weighed me down like a heavy stone. The once lively, hopeful girl inside me had faded into nothingness. I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare of pain and humiliation. One night, as I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I couldn't live like this anymore. My life was slipping away, and if I didn't act soon, I feared I might not survive. I had to leave. I knew he would never willingly let me go. He saw me as his possession, something to control and dominate. But I couldn't stay. My survival depended on escape. The next day, when he left for work, I made my move. Wrapping myself in a large shawl to hide the bruises covering my arms, I mustered whatever strength I had left and stepped out of the house for the first time in what felt like ages. Every step was agony, my body protesting, but I pushed forward. I reached my mother's house, barely able to hold myself together. The moment she opened the door, I collapsed into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Ami, I can't do this anymore, I choked out between sobs. She gasped at my appearance, horror washing over her face. Shaista, what happened to you? She cried, holding me close. Between ragged breaths, I told her everything. The abuse, the humiliation, the mistake that had cost me everything. She listened, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling as she held mine. My child, she whispered, stroking my hair, you should have come to me sooner. I sobbed harder, realizing that I had endured far more than I should have. I had been blinded by love, by the hope of fixing a broken marriage that was never meant to be fixed. That night, as I lay in my childhood bed, safe for the first time in months, I realized the road ahead wouldn't be easy. My husband wouldn't let me go easily. He would come looking for me, and I had to be strong. But for now, I allowed myself a moment of relief. I had escaped, and that was the first step. I had made up my mind I could no longer stay with that man, but my mother refused to understand. She was adamant about sending me back, unwilling to listen to my desperate pleas. I looked her in the eyes and told her in no uncertain terms, if you force me to go back to him, I will take my own life. I will not spend another day with that mentally unstable man. My mother, however, thought I was being stubborn, blaming my resistance on the fact that I had never wanted to marry a Hakim in the first place. She believed that my reluctance stemmed from my initial resentment towards the marriage, assuming I had never truly accepted my husband. But how could I explain to her the horrors I had endured? How could I make her see that my husband was not just difficult, he was a monster who had stripped me of my dignity, treating me like an object rather than a partner? Again and again, she urged me to reconsider, to return to my home, but I was resolute. I locked myself in my room, refusing to listen to her reasoning. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally drained. I could no longer live in fear and pain and constant humiliation. That night, my worst fear came true. My husband arrived at my mother's house, demanding to see me. His voice was loud and firm as he insisted that I return home with him. I could hear him through the walls arguing with my mother. "What is the meaning of this?" he questioned angrily. "Why is she refusing to come back? What have you filled her head with?" From inside my room, I could hear my mother trying to reason with him. "She won't listen to me either," she admitted. "I've been talking to her all day, but she refuses to go back. Something serious must have happened between you two. Why don't you tell me the truth?" I stayed silent, curled up in the corner of the room, my heart pounding. I knew he was just outside, his presence suffocating me even through the closed door. Moments later, I heard his footsteps approaching my room. He knocked softly at first, then spoke in a calm, almost pleading voice. "Shaista, open the door, let's talk. Come home, I promise. Things will be different." His voice was deceptively gentle, but I knew better. I knew the rage lurking beneath that calm exterior. Without thinking, I screamed from behind the door, my voice trembling but firm. "I will never go back with you. You are not a husband. You are a monster. You've treated me like a slave, used me whenever you wanted, and I refuse to live like that anymore." His tone shifted instantly, anger seeping into his voice. "Shaista, don't make this difficult. Come home now, and I swear I won't hurt you again. I promise." But I was done believing his lies. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you," I cried out. Hearing my defiance, he banged on the door, his patience wearing thin. "Enough of this drama. Open the door now," he demanded, his voice filled with frustration. My mother tried to intervene, pleading with him to give me some space, but my brother, standing by, firmly told him to leave. "She's made up her mind," my brother said. "You should leave for tonight." Reluctantly, he stormed out of the house, but I knew it wasn't over. I knew he would be back, and he did come back day after day, standing at our doorstep, demanding that I return. My mother continued to plead with me, insisting that I give my marriage another chance. But each time, I shut myself away, refusing to listen. I had suffered enough, and I could no longer endure the thought of going back to a man who had no regard for my emotions, my dignity, or my well-being. Finally, I gathered the courage to say what had been weighing on my heart for so long. I wanted a divorce. The very word sent shockwaves through my family. My father and brother sat me down, their faces etched with concern. "Shaista, think carefully before making such a decision," my father said. "Divorce is not an easy step. Society doesn't look kindly on divorced women. Have you considered all your options?" But I had made up my mind. "What options, Abu?" I asked, my voice breaking. "A man who doesn't even respect his wife? Who treats me like an object, not a partner? Is this the life you want for me?" Tears welled up in my mother's eyes, and I could see the helplessness in them. My father, realizing the depth of my pain, sighed deeply about. "If this is truly what you want," he said, "then we will support you." And with that, the decision was made. When my husband received the divorce papers, his reaction was predictable. He came to our house one last time, his face contorted in rage. "So this is how you're going to end things?" he spat. "Wait, running back to your parents like a coward?" I stood my ground, looking him in the eye. "I'm not running," I said firmly. "I'm freeing myself from a life of misery." His eyes darkened, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. As the days passed, a strange sense of relief washed over me. I was finally free from the torment, the fear, the suffocating control. It wasn't going to be easy rebuilding my life from scratch, but I knew one thing for sure. I had chosen my dignity over a life of misery. My family stood by my side, supporting me in every way they could. Society whispered, neighbors gossiped, but I held my head high. I had fought for my freedom, and I had won. Looking back, I realize how close I came to losing myself. But now, with each passing day, I feel stronger, more resilient. I learned that no woman should ever have to endure what I did, and that sometimes walking away is the bravest thing one can do. For a girl, marriage is often considered one of the most beautiful and cherished moments of her life. It's a dream she nurtures from childhood, weaving fantasies of love, companionship, and happiness. But unfortunately, this dream doesn't always turn into a beautiful reality. For some, it becomes a nightmare that shatters their soul and leaves scars too deep to heal. My story was no different. I tried with all my heart to forget the pain, to erase the dark memories that haunted me. But bad memories don't fade away so easily. They cling to you, resurfacing in the quiet moments when you least expect them. It was only when I turned to Allah, immersing myself in His remembrance, that I began to find a sense of peace. I had always heard that true tranquility lies in the remembrance of Allah, and now I was living proof of it. As I bowed my head in prayer and whispered my sorrows to my Creator, I felt an unexplainable calm washing over me piece by piece. Slowly but surely, my heart found solace, and my soul began to heal. To all the parents out there, I have only one plea. Take care of your daughters. When you arrange their marriages, investigate thoroughly. Ensure that you are entrusting your precious flower not to a monster in human disguise, but to a man worthy of her love and respect. Because in today's world, there are beasts who walk among us, waiting to crush the dreams of innocent girls. Life, no matter how complete it may seem, is never truly perfect. Everyone faces their own share of struggles, their own missing pieces. But the only way to fill those voids is by turning to Allah. The hardships we encounter in life often come as a test, a reminder that we have strayed too far from our faith. We become so consumed by worldly desires, chasing wealth, status, and fleeting pleasures, that we forget our true purpose, our connection with our Creator. How often do we prioritize everything over our prayers? How many times do we delay our salah, telling ourselves that we are too busy, too tired, too preoccupied? We forget that in seeking Allah's guidance, we find the strength to overcome every hardship. If only we kept our hearts connected to Allah, if only we constantly sought His help and refuge from trials, life would be so much easier. There would be no sorrow too great, no challenge too overwhelming. Dua is the most powerful weapon a believer possesses, yet we are so engrossed in our lives that we forget to make use of it. We let days, weeks, and even months pass without raising our hands in prayer, without asking for Allah's guidance. And then we wonder why our lives feel empty and chaotic. But the truth is, the solution to all our problems lies in sincere supplication. When we sincerely call upon Allah, He listens. When we ask for His protection, He grants it. When we seek His mercy, He showers it upon us. The power of dua is immense, yet we often underestimate it. This world is temporary. Nothing here is permanent, yet we live as if we will be here forever. We chase after material possessions, forgetting that our true home is the hereafter. If only we embraced the reality that this life is but a fleeting moment, perhaps our sufferings wouldn't feel so unbearable. Every hardship, every tear, every heartbreak, it's all a test. And through these trials, Allah wants us to come back to Him, to remember that He is the ultimate source of comfort and peace. The more we immerse ourselves in this world, the more distant we become from our true purpose. But the moment we reconnect with Allah, everything begins to fall into place. I have learned this lesson the hard way. At my darkest moment, when I thought there was no escape, I found Allah's mercy embracing me. Through prayer, through patience, through unwavering faith, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. And so I urge every woman facing similar struggles, turn to Allah. Pour your heart out in prayer. Seek His guidance, for He is the best of planners. No man, no worldly possession, and no fleeting comfort can ever replace the peace that comes from truly trusting Allah. And to every parent reading this, please be cautious. Do not rush into decisions regarding your daughter's futures. Investigate, ask questions, and ensure that the man you choose for her will treat her with the dignity and respect she deserves. Marriage should not be a prison. It should be a sanctuary, a place of love, trust, and mutual understanding. And if it isn't, then it's better to walk away than to live a life of silent suffering. As I look back now, I realize that my hardships were not in vain. They taught me resilience, they brought me closer to my Creator, and they made me stronger than I ever imagined I could be. If you are facing hardships in your marriage or your life, know this: Allah sees your pain. He hears your silent cries, and He will bring ease, for after hardship, there is always ease. Hold on to hope, hold on to faith, and never stop believing in the power of dua. Because in the end, it is our faith that carries us through the darkest of times and leads us to the light.